Thank you for coming to listen to my talk. Um, so what I'm going to speak to you about today, as Susan already mentioned, is my project to map all the ancient woodland in Wiltshire and Swindon. And the talk is mostly going to be kind of the reasons why we are mapping these woodlands and why old age is so important for wildlife in woodlands, and a bit about the history of Wiltshire's woodland habitats. And then I'll go into a bit more detail about the actual project and the specific work I've been doing. So I think, and also I'm going to get out of the way first, like who I actually work for and who's funding this project. It's a little bit complicated, but basically I work for Wiltshire and Swindon Biological Record Centre, which is like a department within Wiltshire Wildlife Trust. And our role is to collate, manage and disseminate the county's biological records. So when recorders or people who have an interest in wildlife go out and take observations, they submit their data to us, it gets expertly verified, and then we provide that data to ecological consultants to support their work in protecting rare and threatened species. But we also have additional functions, and we have a number of different conservation projects where we make use of this data. And the biggest one really going on at the moment, one of the most important ones for us at the moment is this Ancient Woodland Inventory project, which is being funded by Natural England and the Woodland Trust. And that's been my responsibility for the last 11 months. So yes, that's a bit about the background of who I am. And these are the three sections of the talk. So we've got why does woodland age matter in nature conservation? And then more like about the history of Wiltshire's woodland and how people have shaped the woodlands in Wiltshire. And finally, the specific projects that I'm working on. So why does old age matter to nature conservationists? To really illustrate this point, I'm starting with a kind of anecdotal example that's quite powerful in showing this message. And these are two woodlands just south of Wroughton, kind of on a shallow escarpment, 𝐁𝐢𝐨𝐶𝐝 Wood and King's Farm Wood. And they're both Wiltshire Wildlife Trust reserves. They both have a fair amount of deciduous trees in them, though slightly more conifers in King's Farm Wood. But they're very different in terms of their value of biodiversity. And you can see this in the number of plant species that have been recorded in these two woodlands. 𝐁𝐢𝐶𝐝 Wood has 210 plant species that we've got in our database, and King's Farm Wood has a lot fewer, at just 135. So there's 75 more species of plants found in 𝐁𝐢𝐶𝐝 Wood than in King's Farm Wood. So why is that? Well, if we look at the species that are present in 𝐁𝐢𝐶𝐝 Wood but missing from King's Farm Wood, interestingly, a lot of these are species that are associated with really good quality woodland habitat. And I've got 4 examples here. First of all, the early purple orchid. There's the wood anemone, herb Paris, which is quite a cool, distinctive looking thing with its 4 leaves. And finally, Ramsons, which is also known as wild garlic. So that's something that people sometimes take and eat from woodlands. They're all spring flowers, and that's part of their adaptation to obviously being in a woodland. They make use of the sunlight when the trees have not got leaves on them. So, and then they kind of go dormant during the summer when it's a lot shadier. But that doesn't really answer the question of why are they missing from King's Farm Wood. And what's interesting is comparing the ages of these two woods. 𝐁𝐢𝐶𝐝 Wood is shown on this 1880-ish map as pretty much the same shape it is today with some kind of change, whereas King's Farm Wood wasn't present at all, and it was probably either arable or pasture. And in fact, King's Farm Wood is a plantation from about the 20th century. And 𝐁𝐢𝐶𝐝 Wood is an ancient woodland that we've got historical documentary evidence going back to the late 1700s, but probably existed well before that, perhaps into medieval times. And that explains why there's so many more plant species there. there's this key relationship between woodland history and the diversity of species that we find in woodlands. So yeah, Cloutswood, ancient, more plant species, and particularly ones that are associated with good quality woodland habitats. King's Farm wood, and more recent plantation. And actually, I've done a bit of analysis looking at the whole of Wiltshire, and there's this really strong pattern of ancient woodlands being better for certain plant species than recent woodland. What this plot shows is 1 kilometre squares of the county plotted by the number of woodland axiophyte species recorded. And axiophyte just means they are associated with good quality woodland habitat. And ancient woodland squares, so squares containing some ancient woodland shown on the left, can have a large number of these species, probably quite well affected by how much recording effort has gone into each square. Whereas squares with recent woodland don't tend to show many species at all. And there's a lot fewer. In fact, they're no better really than squares of the county that don't have any woodland at all. So if you do see a scene like this, where it's carpeted in bluebells, that's a good indication that you're looking at ancient woodland, because bluebells are one of these species that don't colonize recent woodland very well. But there's a lot of other species that have this similar kind of association with ancient woodlands. For example, one really good species for Wiltshire is the wild service tree, which we find in like massive abundance in the Braden Forest area compared to quite often what you find. And it just doesn't spread very well outside ancient woodlands or outside of any woodlands that it's present in. So you could plant it, but it's unlikely to make its way there naturally if you make a new woodland. And it's a cool species. It's also known as checkers. It's got these fruits that used to be rotted slightly and then eaten. And it has these like flame orange leaves that turn quite early in the autumn. So you can see it quite strongly showing out in a woodland like Raven's Roost Wood. The other thing about ancient woodlands compared to those more recent plantations is the abundance of dead wood, which is built up over the centuries. And that can be host to a large number of different fungi species. And it also is the right sort of habitat for kind of less well understood and less well recorded species of saprocyllic invertebrates, which have a life stage where they rely on deadwood habitats, like the lemon slug, which has only been recorded in Cotswold Waterpark area, but in England, it's very closely associated with ancient woodlands. And it's not like the slugs that might eat your lettuces in your garden. It actually feeds on fungi. Another example is the cobweb beetle, which has a really cool story behind it. It lives underneath, inside the bark, or its larvae live inside the bark of ancient trees. And they get their food by stealing insects that have been trapped inside spider webs. And all of these long hairs that you can see on it are kind of to protect it from the spider attacking it. And once again, it's a nationally scarce species that's only really found in ancient woodlands or very old woodlands. But there are more like pretty pretty in the traditional sense, like species like the silver-washed fritillary, which relies on some of those ancient woodland associated plants, and also hazel dormouse, which is particularly fond of the kind of like old hazel coppices that you get in ancient woodlands. And this is what a kind of more recent plantation looks like. And it's striking how devoid of a lot of those species and habitat conditions it is. It's got a carpet of like just ivy on the ground, not so many of those ancient woodland associated plants, although there are a few bluebells and ramsons kind of encroaching into it, and then very little deadwood and trees that are all pretty much the same age. Not many old trees in there. This is a plantation that's made in the 20th century. Whereas an ancient woodland like Oysters Coppice down in South Semley in the far south of Wiltshire has a massive diversity of different vegetation structure with like an understory of holly and hazel coppice, and then standard trees of oak and a diverse like ground flora as well. So it's like been clear to ecologists for a number of decades just how important old woodlands are, and these conditions don't just reappear in recent plantations very quickly. So they're kind of irreplaceable in that sense. But there's also another reason to value ancient woodlands, and to do with their old age. And I would say that's about what role do they have as part of Wiltshire's like heritage and its history. And the first way that I see this is in their link to the wildwood that would have once covered the entirety of Wiltshire before humans cleared that woodland for agriculture. And it was a very different landscape in kind of unimaginable in a way. And it would have been inhabited by large animals like the auroch, which is kind of a wild giant cow. And there would have been a kind of dynamic but quite slowly shifting change to the vegetation over time, with areas of clearings created by grazing animals and opened up, but still this continuity of woodland habitat, which would have been great for a lot of those species I've just talked about. But those species suffered a lot when people cleared large areas and converted them to open pasture or arable, starting in the Neolithic, so like 5,000 years ago, and starting particularly on not upland, but downland areas in Wiltshire because of the lighter soils and it's easier to cultivate. But then moving into the clay vales and kind of stamping in this landscape that we have today in Wiltshire. But so what I'm saying there is that the only kind of retention of what was the wildwood like is probably going to be within ancient woodlands. And that feel, I do get that when I'm walking around an ancient woodland. It's a very different kind of place to be than an open field with its straight hedgerows. And then within ancient woodlands, you find a lot of evidence for the fact that these have been heavily managed and used by people. So they're not wildwood. They are semi-natural habitats, and they've been shaped by humans over the centuries. And two key examples of things you might see in ancient woodlands are wood banks, like shown on the left, which are earth banks with ditches on the outside that might go around woodland to demarcate its boundary, which is really important because these woodlands were so valuable to people that they had to ensure they had control over it. There's also coppice stools, which are a kind of remnant of how people extracted wood products from an ancient woodland. And they're kind of mimicking what might have happened in the wildwood when a large grazing animal or foraging animal kind of crashed into trees and knocked them over and foraged on the growing shoots. And what people did, and what they still do in some woodlands, is cut the stems of the tree down to the ground on a rotation, say every 5 to 25 years, and let the tree regenerate, which it can do pretty much indefinitely. And then what that process allows you to extract like different sizes of woody products for loads of different uses. So what would these managed woodlands of the medieval times look like? Well, they probably would have had a kind of dense understory of hazel coppice, or maybe another species like this. And this is a picture of Raven's Roost, which has this management still going on today. And then scattered timber trees, which were allowed to grow up and grow into full trees, quite often oak. And then those timbers were also used. So quite open, but still kind of like mimicking the type of dynamic change that would have happened in the old wildwoods. Certainly not untouched, not just left. And the reason why they were so heavily managed is because these resources were really important for society and the economy. For example, these old barns would have been made out of the timbers, like this barn, which is in Cressing Temple Barns in Essex, which has timbers dating back to potentially 1200s And you can see they're not massive. They are from these oak trees that have been allowed to grow up, but then cut down as soon as they were usable size. And the coppice was used for so many different things, like charcoal making, so an important source of fuel, any kind of tools, different sized tools, like even the spokes perhaps on a wheel. I mean, they relied on wood for so much, that so many uses that we don't have so much now that we can use other materials. And we don't really have direct evidence of what these woodlands look like, except for a few artistic interpretations that remain. And this is a drawing or a painting from a Flemish artist. But what it shows is, again, this understory of coppice with scattered timber trees. And there's some interesting, like, botanical species that can be seen in there, apparently. That was an interpretation of Oliver Rackham. But anyway, that gives you an idea of what kind of a medieval type of woodland might look like. And there wasn't very much of this woodland left, even by the time of the Norman conquest in 1066. So in the Domesday Book, they record in Wiltshire the rough area of woodland found within each manorial area. Like, for example, in Bromham, this entry shows the area of woodland, 𝐿𝐢𝐥𝐭𝐬𝐡𝐢𝐫, which is measured in leagues. And I think I worked it out about a couple of square kilometers of woodland. And looking at the entire book, people have looked through and worked out what was the approximate coverage of woodlands in England at this point, at 1086, I believe, when they created this. And they think it's about 15%. And we're on, in England now, is about 10% covered by woodland. So already by that point, not very much woodland left. And the woodland that was left was therefore very valuable. That graph shows that over time, there was a slight encroaching and loss of woodland up till the 19th century, when things changed and wood products began to be produced through plantation forestry. And we did see an increase of woodland in England from about the mid-1800s. So these woodlands, they were being kind of well managed and not being lost at a great rate during medieval era. We know a lot about the legal frameworks that people had to protect them and to manage their resources because of how valuable they are. And one of the most important examples of this in Wiltshire are the royal forests. And these were areas where the king had the rights to most of all the deer, which were important for the king to like entertain guests with big feasts, and also the woody products that come from woodlands. And the royal forests in Wiltshire, their greatest extent in the 13th century, covered the areas which still have the most woodland today. So places like the Breydon Forest, which I've already mentioned, and famously Savernake, but also places like Chippenham and Melksham Forest, where Bowood Estate is now. And then there's Chute, Clarendon, Melchire, and Selwood as well. So we have records of how these woodlands were managed from the kind of courts and that were set up to defend the king's rights to the resources. And we also know that it was a good source of revenue to the king as well. So just showing the value of ancient woodlands in the medieval economy before the Industrial Revolution. And these management practices are key to conservation of woodland today. So this is an old sign from Blackmore Copse, which is the first Wiltshire Wildlife Trust nature reserve, showing the kind of diversity of wildlife that relies on management to bring in light, like coppicing. And this awareness of the kind of rich historical background to these ancient woodlands and the value they have for wildlife led in the 70s and 80s to the creation of the Ancient Woodland Inventory. And it was based on the fact, like I've said, that they're irreplaceable habitats, and therefore to protect them, we need to know where they are. And the way they did this was they compared old maps with recent maps, going back to kind of 19th century, and just really traced around with pen and pencil where the ancient woodlands are. And that data set's been maintained by Natural England and digitized and uploaded to DEFRA's website. And it's a key thing in conservation now. Many of those woodlands are protected as SSSIs, but the ancient woodland designation itself provides a bit of protection within the planning system. So in theory, they should be protected from any adverse effects of development, which is pretty important because prior to the 70s, there was a massive loss of ancient woodland, both through grubbing out for creating agriculture or housing developments, and also converting them to a plantation forestry system, kind of destroying all of the value of coppicing and the deadwood habitats I've talked about previously. But the current Ancient Woodland Inventory has limitations in that it's not really been updated since the 80s, and we have a lot more historical evidence that we can put into the data set now to make it more accurate, more authoritative, and trustworthy, and also to capture a large, massive number of ancient woodlands that they missed, simply because they didn't really have the time, and they focused on only woodlands greater than 2 hectares in size, whereas many of those smaller woodlands, less than 2 hectares, are just really still very valuable for wildlife. So I'm going to just explain the process of this update, and really does start from scratch using more accurate maps. And I've got an example woodland here, which is Hazelland Woods near Bremhill, which is one of Avonlea-Tree's sites. This is the recent aerial imagery that I had to start with, and I think it must be pre a lot of the planting that's gone on at this site. And you can see there's some bits of woodland shown here. And what we did was we overlaid late 19th century maps, basically the earliest highly accurate map of woody vegetation cover of the country. And it reveals that this used to be an interestingly shaped wood with the name Hazelland Wood, right next to the River Marden, with some kind of osier beds on the other side of the river. What we did was we picked out the areas where there's continuity of woodland from 1880s to today, the areas that we call long established woodland. And that's our starting point for the data set. Now, and that starting point is a lot more woodland than is currently designated ancient. So on the current inventory, there's about 1,100 parcels, these like individual polygons of woodland currently designated. We, at this stage, had 7,100 parcels of long-established woodland to investigate. So a lot more, and almost twice the area covered. A lot of that is going to be plantations from the 19th century, which are less valuable to wildlife. But some of those are going to have this continuity going back to 1600 AD, the cutoff date that we call for something being ancient. And those can be added into the Ancient Woodland Inventory, and they'll gain all of the protections that are currently afforded to ancient woodlands. So to get to that point, we need to look at this pre-1880 evidence. And we had some Ordnance Survey maps that are really early. They're from 1800-ish, produced, the first kind of Ordnance Survey maps produced. And we used the drawings that were like drafts for these maps. So I've got one shown here. And you can see it doesn't quite capture the shape of Hazelland Wood as accurately as the later map did. And that's because they're more like atlases. They're not really there to show accurately woodland shapes, but they're still useful to show woodlands that were present. We also looked at aerial photographs from World War II, those taken by the RAF and also ones taken by the German Air Force. And they're useful at this point of like pre-1950s, where there was a massive change to woodland management, a lot of planting up of old wood pastures and stuff. So those were quite handy to have just to establish that continuity through the 20th century. And we looked at the we looked at maps that are pre-1880 that are not from like the Ordnance Survey, and they are this kind of scattering of different land use maps produced by old estates to just show what lands that they own. Also, there's these enclosure maps, and this is an example here. They were produced when areas that used to be like areas of common or open field, where people in the community had shared rights of access. And what happened during the 18th and 19th centuries is a lot of this area got turned into a more intensive system of agriculture with one owner. So when they were divvying up ownership, they created these maps. And this is one example showing hazelland coppice, pretty much the same shape as it was at the end of the 19th century. And this map is from the end of the 18th century. Many of them are like scrolls, massive, beautifully drawn scrolls like this one. So how much evidence have we managed to put together so far to establish woodland continuity? Well, everything's been checked against the recent aerial imagery, starting on the right here. About half of the long-established woodland was checked for the mid-20th century aerial photos. And then the 19th century has been pretty well covered. Everything in the 1880s accurate Ordnance Survey maps. There's these tithe maps produced in the 1840s or 1830s. They're made for tax purposes, but they show where woodlands were. And about 75% has been checked against that. And then pretty much everything has been checked against the Ordnance Survey maps at the start of the 1800s. And then what's been a lot of work is trying to get the continuity going all the way back to 1600 using all of these different estate maps and enclosure maps, which all held at Wiltshire and Swindon History Centre in Chippenham. And we haven't quite managed to cover everything there yet, but it's been very interesting seeing a lot of these old maps. And it's been amazing being able to prove continuity all the way back to 1600. And I think our earliest map that I've managed to use so far was from 1589, and that shows Groveley Wood. And it pretty much shows Groveley Wood the same shape, the same extent as it is today. So to kind of begin to sum up, I hope that's given you appreciation about why ancient woodlands are so valuable when we hear these headlines about destruction, for example, in the HS2 construction. It's about the special value to wildlife that ancient woodlands have that's very difficult to recreate and probably take centuries to reappear in more recent woodlands. And also this management practices that have gone back centuries that have helped shape these conditions, and is also part of our heritage, part of the history, the remains of the pre-industrial economy and society. Which is why the new Ancient Woodland Inventory, not only is it going to help designate and protect a lot of small ancient woodlands that were missed in the previous round of this work, but I'm hoping it will also show be a proof of how important woodland management and the right kind of woodland management is in woodland conservation. And this is a real big problem at the moment because there's no value really anymore in extracting wood. And if you leave a coppice like this hazel coppice here just to grow up and you don't harvest anything, it can get very dark and shady. And we've got some dog's mercury kind of on the forest floor here, but not very much. There's a risk of losing those special plant species that I talked about at the start. And also coppice stalls begin to die off and they lose their density. So over time, if you don't have any management, sometimes the value of ancient woodland to wildlife can reduce. Though there is also value sometimes in leaving things. But hopefully more of our woodlands in future will look more like this. And I think bearing in mind the history of how these woodlands came to be, that's going to be a good way of proving that this is an important way that woodlands should be. So yeah, thank you for listening to that talk. I hope made sense and has sparked an interest in some of you. If you're interested in donating to Wiltshire Wildlife Trust and supporting their work in projects like this, please head to our website, and I will put this link in the chat. And there is also a link to, well, there's an email address to sign up to our mailing list, which hasn't been very active yet, but we do hope to get some volunteers involved in the project as we move on to doing field surveys to ground truth the evidence of the historical maps, and also potentially other bits of work. So thank you, everyone, and hope you enjoyed the talk, and I'm open to any questions.
Thank you, Euan. That was,
how are you going to do this? Can we just ask questions, or do we have somebody sort of chairing?
I'm chairing. Hi, I'm Susan Barker, and I'm with Avon Needs Trees. I've set up the talk, and I'll be chairing it. So, Teen, I see you already put a comment in the chat box. That's lovely.
Yes,
and
I think it's great. This is wonderful.
Yes.
It's going to be updated. Thank you. It's a brilliant project and very important. Just wanted to raise awareness of the fact that actually there is a very active and productive coppice industry in this country. And although I noticed that you mentioned that you felt that there was that had really sort of gone out of management systems, but in fact, although Wiltshire itself isn't that good, we are on the Dorset borders, and Dorset is fantastically active with lots of people earning a living at it. So I would like to just say, if anybody wants to find out more about what's happening with coppice, there is some of the photos you showed were very much overstood but restorable.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, if we and a lot of people like me work on restoration more than we work on other types of coppice. There is a lot of insight for coppice, but I just wanted to raise that up, people's awareness, the fact that there is professional coppicing. There is good what you can make a living. There is wood to be got out of the woods in a really sustainable way. And if anybody wants to find out more, they can either look at the National Coppice Federation website, or I've put up my email address. If anybody wants to email me for any details about local coppice woodlands or local coppicers, then please do. And it's brilliant. And I hope that we'll be able to be in touch with you as well about the survey that we're just about to carry out. With
Oh, yes. Yeah, I've heard about that.
Yeah, so Euan, if you're not already, I can put you in touch with people doing it.
Yeah, thank you for making that point. Yeah, I do agree that I have heard about businesses bringing up extracting wood and being able to sell it for a profit. That's very exciting, isn't it?
lovely. Thank you, Teen, for raising that. That's really, really helpful and interesting. And the website that Teen put in the chat box there is the National Coppice Federation, www.ncfed.org.uk. So check out the National Coppice Federation. They seem like they're being very active on this issue. We've got lots and lots of positive feedback about the talk, Euan, and some other questions. So let me just have a quick, yes, where we've had a question, where and how can one find such historical records of woodland? Are there places that people can go and look at some of this information themselves if they're interested, Euan?
So yeah, maps are really the best source of evidence for woodland history, and the places to go for old maps, first of all, the National Library of Scotland website, which has some old Ordnance Survey maps digitized and georeferenced, so you can search them just like Google Earth or something. The Wiltshire and Swindon History Centre has got a project collaboration with other counties in the southwest on a website called Know Your Place, which I can put a link to in the chat as well. And this has some old maps on there of Wiltshire, including the tithe maps. And it's a little bit tricky to find out what information you can get out of a tithe map, but there's an associated document called an apportionment, which is also available on that website, which lists who owned which bit of land and what type of land use it was, and the name of that wood or field. So that's very interesting to look at. And then if you really want to get involved in research, Wiltshire and Swindon History Centre in Chippenham has like literally hundreds of old maps and estate plans, and anyone is free to order one of those documents, which you can find on their online catalogue, and look at it in the reading room at the History Centre, which is yeah, it's what I've been doing particularly over the last couple of months. It's good fun. There's also the Victoria County History Project, which has details about land use history and the histories of specific parishes in Wiltshire. So that's worth a look as well. So yeah, lots of links, which I'll try and add into the chat at the end.
Fantastic, thank you. And Euan, if you send me the links, what I will do, I will send out a follow-on email to everyone who's attended this evening. So we will put all that in the follow-on email that will come out, and I'll put the Coppers Federation email in there too, and the emails that you put up on the talk. Yeah, we've had a couple of interesting questions here. Thank you, Euan. We own an ancient woodland.
Sorry to interrupt, Chair. I'm sorry. Could you also send out my email address so people can contact me if they would like to about coppicing in Wiltshire?
I'm very happy to do that. Yes, that's fine.
The National Federation site, if you write a message through that, you don't always get a very quick reply.
Okay, that's fine. Yes, well, thank you for that. If you're happy for me to do that, I'll certainly add that in. Yes, thank you. So yes, the question we had, Euan, was we own an ancient woodland and would be very interested in contributing to your project. How do landowners get involved?
So landowners can get involved, well, really by getting in contact with me directly. It's probably the best way. So we can see what level of evidence have we got so far for that specific woodland, and does it need any work on the ground? But yeah, that would be amazing if landowners can get in touch, because it's the real challenge for us is finding out who owns which woodland and acquiring permission to actually look at stuff on the ground. So
so contact you. On the same note, Fiona has asked, how can I find out more about Selwood Forest? I own some ancient woodland within its old boundaries and would love to know more. So is that would be the same to contact you directly and
to find out about Selwood Forest history, I think in the Victoria County History, which is digitised and available online, there's a chapter on the different forests of Wiltshire. So there might be an entry on Selwood Forest if they haven't had the chance to look at that already. But the thing to bear in mind is that my knowledge is mainly focused on post-1600, unfortunately. And anything pre-1600 is kind of outside my territory of knowledge, which will include the time of when forests were kind of in existence.
Well, there's a lovely collaborative process going on here, because Julian Height has responded in the chat to say, hi Fiona, I've been researching Selwood Forest for some years. You can start on the Reviving Selwood Forest Facebook page.
Oh, wow, I hadn't seen that before. That's cool.
Yes, so check out the Reviving Selwood Forest Facebook page. Julian Height has sent that in, and let's have a look. So Julian is in the process of writing a book on the subject, and there's a link here. There's a chapter in my last book, www.britonsancientforest.co.uk. Yeah, britonsancientforest.co.uk. So lots of information coming in about ancient woodland. And Stephen asks, what evidence have you found of monastic influence in shaping ancient woodland? Has that been something that you've come across at all?
I don't know anything specifically, unfortunately.
Okay.
I think the best that I know about monastic influence is the records of when the woodlands have been taken away from monasteries and given over to private landowners in the 1500s.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, another one that's possibly outside your remit, Euan, but I'm just throwing them all at you. What are the best ways of protecting ancient woodlands, given that things like HS2 are able to go ahead, despite the woodlands having that recognition and theoretical protection? Is that something you feel able to respond to?
I'm not too much of an expert on the planning process, unfortunately. I think in terms of like having tree protection orders can help, and and being designated on the Ancient Woodland Inventory means there should be a process to check that any developments don't have any negative adverse impacts on ancient woodlands. But beyond that, it's very difficult, especially for projects as large as HS2. But I think we should bear in mind as well that proper management of ancient woodlands is another way to improve how they are, and the work that people are doing to increase coppicing and stuff is also really valuable, as well as making sure that stuff isn't lost, but it's not being lost as quickly as it was, thankfully, in the 20th century. But that's the best I can answer, I'm afraid, that question.
Thank you for taking that question on. It's a big question. Is the work that you're doing in Wiltshire being replicated across the entire country? Are you aware? Yes.
Yes, yeah.
Fantastic.
Natural England has really they've taken the approach of contracting each record centre, like WSBRC, who I work for, to do the project within their own county. And there's at least 40-50 different people doing this project at the moment in different counties, I think. And the only area that's not really being done is the southeast, which they have previously done in the 2010s in kind of like pilot projects. But yeah, and everyone's at different stages and kind of finding their way with this quite difficult task.
Yes, yeah, fascinating. It'll be so great to hear about what's happening and that it is happening. Yeah, we've had a little bit of feedback on the previous question. So Johnny, who answered the question, said thanks for answering the question, and hopefully there are many minds in this room to give some thought and love towards our ancient woodlands and give some protection for the future. And Julian has added, in terms of the planning, that when determining planning applications, local planning authorities should apply the following principles, including development resulting in the loss or deterioration of irreplaceable habitats, such as ancient woodland and ancient or veteran trees, should be refused unless there are wholly exceptional reasons, although obviously this can be overridden, as it was with HS2. Teen has joined us again to say, can I encourage people to write to their MPs about what protections will be left following kind of cancellations to EU protections? Yes. And Heather Sheely says, how can we be sure the planting now will be respected long enough to be ancient down the line? And I guess that's not necessarily
a tricky one.
it's a very, very tricky one. I know that Avon Needs Trees have certainly taken the role of purchasing the land to create permanent woodlands and entering into partnership covenants to create permanent woodlands. But yes, it does need to be thought about, doesn't it? We hope that Avon Needs Trees are currently planting up the ancient woodlands of the future. Okay, so let's have a look. I'm just having a little scroll down, see if we've got any more. There's a lot of passion out there about protecting the ancient woodlands through peaceful protest and direct action, such as Extinction Rebellion, Stop HS2, and legal challenges through NGOs and Friends of the Earth. If anyone has any final questions for you on the Ancient Woodland Inventory, pop them in the chat box now. That would be fantastic. But like I said, we will put all the links that Euan has mentioned and that other people have shared into a follow-on email that will follow on from this talk. And we have been recording the talk, and you'll be able to see the talk on our online archive of all our online talks that we've given. So you can watch this back again if you wanted to pick up some of the details or the images or information in it. Julian says, great to see this project in action. Euan, know of any plans for the same in Somerset? Do you know specifically in relation to Somerset?
All I know is that the same project is underway in Somerset, and I'm not sure what stage they're at there. But it's the Environmental Records Centre in Somerset that's doing that work. I can't remember their name.
But so it's great to know it's happening nationally. That's fantastic. Tina's asked, are you able to include ancient hedgerows too? Is that something that's in the remit of the project?
That's outside the remit of this project. We have
yeah.
quite specific criteria about the minimum size of woodland we're allowed. It has to be larger than 0.25 hectares and not too narrow that it would be basically a hedgerow. But ancient hedgerows have also got value over more recent hedgerows. So hopefully, I think there have been discussions about this previously in Natural England. Hopefully there will be a future project of mapping ancient hedgerows of Wiltshire and helping to protect those from damage and bad management.
Yes. Just to come back on the Somerset, we've had someone feed into the chat that yes, the 2-year project in Somerset is just entering its 2nd year. Somerset Wildlife Trust are leading the project. They are looking for ancient woodland surveyors. The person who's fed in is one of those. So yeah, if people are in Somerset, please do get in touch with Somerset Wildlife Trust about surveying ancient woodlands in the county there. So yeah, check. It sounds like check in with your local wildlife trust and find out if they're involved with this where you are, if you want to find out more about things in your specific area. Well, that is absolutely fantastic, Euan. Thank you so much for all your for your time and all the information tonight. It's triggered a huge amount of interest and debate. And if we put your email in the follow-up email that we send out, people will be able to contact you if they're interested in finding out more, or they can contribute more. They're connected with Ancient Woodlands and they can feed into the project. So I just want to thank everyone for coming along and sharing this talk with us this evening and getting involved and supporting Avon Needs Trees. As I said at the beginning of the talk, if you are interested in planting trees for the future, Avon Needs Trees are currently, we're coming into the last little while of this year's tree planting season, and there's opportunities to help us create new woodlands in North Wiltshire at our Hazeland project between Chippenham and Carn, and then over in our new Ed Woods woodland over near Shepton Mallet, and in our fantastic new Great Avon Woods project that we're just launching near Pensford, south of Bristol. So all the information about the woodlands, about the volunteering days and our events are on our website, avonesettrees.org.uk. So please do join us on the land to create some more woodland. Thanks so much everyone for coming along this evening, and we hope to see you again soon, either online or on the land. Thanks again, Euan, so much. That was
Thank you, everyone.
fantastic. Thanks everyone. Have a good night.